Assault 4. During World War II, virtually all belligerents used specialized armored vehicles to provide direct support to infantry on the battlefield. The German armed forces used assault guns for this purpose. The origins of the idea date back to World War I, when the military recognized the urgent need for mobile artillery to support infantry on the offensive. The gun, which could respond quickly to the need to suppress enemy fire points and destroy field fortifications, had to be mobile so that it could advance with the infantry and interact directly with them, doing what traditional heavy artillery could not. The trick was that the infantry commander would not have to send a request for fire support with a vest and most likely through several intermediaries, but would be able to communicate directly with the artillerymen, and they in turn would be able to hit not blindly according to the coordinates sent, but by direct fire, observing the target directly. Traditionally, this role had been filled by 50-75 mm light guns that were manually rolled by the crew, but they were too vulnerable to return fire. A single shield of thin armor could not reliably protect against either bullets or what was needed was a fully armored gun, and it would have to be powered by an engine. The muscle power of the artillerymen would not be enough. The Germans could not solve this problem with the means available in World War I. Then came the Treaty of Versailles, and Germany had to forget about self-propelled armored fighting vehicles for a long time, at least about their legal development. Many years later, in 1935, Erich von Manstein, then a colonel, proposed to Ludwig Beck, the chief of staff of the German army, to create an assault artillery Sturmgeschütz by developing a self-propelled artillery unit for direct infantry support on a tank chassis. Such a unit would, of course, have inferior fire maneuverability due to the lack of a turret, but this disadvantage would be fully compensated by much less visibility and vulnerability due to the lower silhouette, better mobility due to less weight, and last but not least, cheapness and ease of production. In June 1935, the Daimler-Benz company received an order to develop this SAU, and 2 years later the famous StuG, short for Sturmgeschütz, was born. Built on the chassis of a PZPF-TEP-UI medium tank and armed with a QA-237 short-barreled 75mm, this vehicle was produced in large quantities by several companies. The largest manufacturer was Alcat, and proved its worth in the early stages of World War II, becoming one of the symbols of the German Blitzkrieg. As the fighting progressed, the assault guns were increasingly required to engage armored vehicles in addition to their other duties. After the Germans faced French, British, and then Soviet heavy armored tanks, the StuGs were equipped with a powerful 75mm StuG IV gun with a 43 caliber barrel and later a 48 caliber barrel. This modification became known as the StuG IV. In February 1943, it was decided to involve Krupp in the production of the StuG IV. Since Krupp did not produce the PZKFWIE, but the medium tank PZKFUIV since 1936, it was considered appropriate to develop a variant of the assault gun on the chassis of the latter. The turret of the StuG IV was easily mounted on the hull of the PZKPF2UE, replacing the turret and turret box. Only the driver's seat had to be moved forward. On the PZKPFT, it was much further away from the center of the vehicle, and a long protrusion of characteristic shape had to be made in the front plate of the deckhouse. The armament of the vehicle consisted, as in the big sister, of a 75mm StuG IV gun with a 48 caliber barrel and an external machine gun remotely controlled from the fighting compartment. To distinguish them from each other, they were designated StuG, IIU, and StuG IV after the names of the tanks on which they were based. Initially, the StuG IV was created in reserve. It was assumed that in the near future, the PZKPFU-IE tanks would be completely replaced by the latest PSKPWU Panther. Their production would be discontinued, and the freed production capacity would be used for the production of assault guns based on them. Reality was different. The PZKFUIV was mass-produced until the end of the war, and the fate of the StuG IV was not as planned, as two important events occurred in quick succession. In August 1943, at a meeting with Hitler, it was concluded that the assault guns were capable of performing a significant portion of the combat tasks usually assigned to tanks And since they were also cheaper, it was worth producing them at all. In November of the same year, the factories of the Alcat Company were subjected to a massive bombing raid by Allied bombers, and this caused great damage to the production of assault guns, because at that time Alcat was their main supplier. The German military leadership urgently needed to compensate for the losses, and Krupp and its StuG IV project came to mind. A prototype, it was converted from a tank, was urgently produced, and on December 16, 1943, Hitler inspected and approved it. Production of the StuG IV was given the go-ahead, and the plans were Napoleonic. For the remaining 2 weeks before the new year, 350 vehicles were to be produced, and in January 1944, the monthly output was to be increased to 500 vehicles. The Krupp management only fueled these insufficiently optimistic plans by saying that in the near future, it would provide 600 chassis with armored hulls that could be quickly built as assault gun. However, they forgot to specify that these chassis and hulls would be taken from the PFWIVF factories, leaving the Panzerwaffe 600 tanks short. The actual production volume turned out to be much more modest. By comparison, a year later, in December 1944, there was already talk of increasing monthly production to 130 vehicles, but even that was not possible. The StuG IV assault guns were produced from December 1943 to May 1945, during which time a total of 1139 units were built, an average of about 63 guns per month. The combat history of the StuG IV is rather difficult to trace. First of all, the legendary German order was only an order in words, and in practice many of those who wrote reports did not hesitate to refer to both types of assault guns simply as StuG, without making any distinction. Second, the first StuG IVs were delivered to the troops in February 1944, when the fate of the war was virtually sealed, and the Third Reich's armed forces were rapidly slipping from solving problems to plugging holes. Accordingly, the new assault guns, as well as the old ones, were used not only within their tactical niche, but also wherever an armored tracked gun could be used. They were often used as anti-tank Saw Panzerjäger in the German classification. And in the second half of the 44th and in the 45th, they were often sent to tank units to make up for the lack of tanks. In the 2nd Panzer Division, for example, one of the companies of the 3rd Panzer Regiment was equipped exclusively with assault guns as of November 1944. The 1,253rd Panzer Grenadier Company had some StuG IVs, but they were used exclusively as tractors. The company commander spoke harshly of these vehicles because of the weakness of their machine gun armament. This is a rather strange statement from an anti-tank gunner, but it clearly shows that in the conditions of retreat and an unstable front, even those who were supposed to shoot at enemy armored vehicles from a safe distance often had to engage in close combat and fight off infantry for the reasons mentioned above. The documented episodes of the StuG IV's combat use do not shine with glorious victories. One of the few exceptions are the actions of the 394th Assault Artillery Brigade in the summer of 1944 on the Western Front. The brigade was equipped with 2 batteries of StuG IV self-propelled guns. On August 6, the brigade reported the destruction of 26 American tanks, 6 of which were reported by Captain von Jena, commander of the 3rd Battery. This did not have much effect on the course of hostilities, however, and 2 weeks later the brigade lost all its vehicles after being surrounded near Falaise. Other assault artillery brigades could not even boast of such successes. The 311th met the end of the war in besieged Breslau, Wrocław, Poland, and at the time of the surrender had a StuG IV self-propelled gun. Among the few surviving vehicles, the 239th Brigade participated in the German offensive at Lake Balaton in Hungary in March 1945, with a company of StuG IV. The 912th Brigade, operating in Courland, now Latvia, had about 3 dozen StuG IVs. Almost all of them became Soviet Army trophies when the brigade surrendered in May 1945. The StuG IV was mass-produced. Its production volumes pale in comparison to its big sister StuG DIE, but are comparable to the number of Tiger tanks produced, 1139 and 1347 vehicles, respectively. However, it had no significant impact on the course of the war and could not have. By 1944, the fate of Hitler's Reich was predetermined, and neither miracle weapon projects nor the usual workhorses of war, such as the StuG IV, could change or significantly delay the final outcome. Very few examples of this self-propelled vehicle have survived to this day. In fact, until 1999, it was thought that none had survived at all. But in August 1999, a StuG IV was found in Poland, bogged down in. It has now been restored and is on display at the Museum of Armored Vehicles in Poznań. Another is on display at the White Eagle Museum in the Polish town of Skarżysko-Kamienna, though it is not quite authentic, as large quantities of StuG IV and meticulously parts had to be used for the restoration. In October 2011, another vehicle was recovered from a swamp in Latvia and is now in a private collection.